Please pray with me. Spirit of wisdom, minister to us, your people, we pray. Help us to see Easter, to experience it amidst all the struggle. We ask in the risen Christ's name and love. Amen. So these are tough times. Who would have thought that in April of 2021, we'd be in another COVID epidemic, right? With hospital cases as high as they've ever been. I mean, that is tough to get your head around. I mean, when this thing first started back in March, I was figuring by Thanksgiving we'd be fine. Duh. Shows what we know sometimes. And, you know, it's having its effect on people. Therapists can't keep up with the caseload. They're as busy as the medical workers in the hospitals. Thankfully, we're not having the death rate among seniors. They've been vaccinated and best practices have been established. But the young people are kind of fed up. And can you remember back when you were, 15 to 25? I mean, we were pretty invincible, right? I mean, to be honest with you, I'm just lucky I'm alive. A couple of the chances I took driving and different things. And so they're getting together in a lot of cases. But also there's a anxiety and a grumpiness. I noticed I had to go to the drugstore, and when I went to the grocery store this past week, people were yelling at the cashier and yelling at each other. You can just feel the tension. And in London, people are being shot on both ends of town, assaults, pepper spray, stealing. Times are tough. And then, not to mention the drug overdoses. I mean, they've skyrocketed and have been accumulatively getting worse. And so we come as a people of faith and as Christians to say, what does our faith say to us about this? And where do we find God in this? And I touched on that last week, but we do well to consider that because, quite frankly, what Christianity has told us for the last 900 years has not been helpful in light of the challenges of life. I remember my first theology class in seminary at the Atlantic School of Theology in Halifax. And Tom Mabey, he was a Jesuit priest, he came in and he said, friends, he said, the Holocaust in Europe, with 5 to 10 million Jews and some, and homosexuals and gypsies, travelers, being killed in that way, to that extent, was beyond what theologians could put into their system of a God who's in charge of all the details and who allows things to happen for some greater good. In the light of such pain as the Holocaust, and then the nuclear bomb, which destroyed 2 cities in Japan and puts us all in peril, they could no longer talk about a God who was in control and had hands on all the levers. And so the God is dead movement that came out of Europe was not from atheists, as I thought as a kid. I heard all these preachers talking about these atheists and the God is dead movement. The God is dead movement came from the church, saying the God, the Sunday school God we grew up with, and that's been proclaimed for 900 years, is dead. And we've been able to start getting in touch with the God of Jesus, who died on a cross, not to satisfy some bloodlust of his Father in heaven, but as a sign that God's on the cross too with us, but that the cross cannot defeat love, and that love wins in the end. And that's a very different reality. And the reason 900 years ago that became the predominant thing was because of another pandemic, the Black Plague. Before the Black Plague, there was an incredible renaissance in Europe, and up until that time, for about 1,100 years, paganism and Christianity were completely intertwined. I mean, the Vatican and the bishops, they had their theologies, but the general people didn't care about them. And in the Renaissance, you had 150 cathedrals built. And they were all dedicated to the goddess, Mary. In fact, the word cathedral means seat. And the cathedrals in Europe were built at a time when they were seen as to be the seat of the goddess Mary. And they changed the architectural style from the Romanesque, which was thick walls and small windows, to the beautiful, ornate columns that when you look down them, the Gothic structure, you know what they look like? What they were made to look like? Trees. Because, of course, the pagans loved to worship outdoors, where we were in the beauty of nature and the divine. And so the Gothic columns they looked like trees. And that's when they invented stained glass in the rose windows, when the light came in and would go into different colors, just like walking through the forest. And in every one of those cathedrals, there was pagan iconography. The green man, animals. And so nature and all of life was seen as infused with the divine. But then when the Great Plague came and we didn't have science and we didn't know what caused it, can you imagine having a plague where 1 out of 3 die and we don't even know how it's caused? The church steps in and says, oh, we know what causes it. This is God's judgment. Do you know the main thing that was going on during the plague was the church was hosting gatherings where everybody would get together and start to beat themselves to try and end the plague, to try and get God's pleasure. I mean, that's the craziness and pain and awfulness that the church's theology over the last 900 years came of. That we're sinful, that nature's sinful, we're all under the curse. And God had to kill Jesus so we could be forgiven. And so, what hope is there? Christianity is rediscovering what a minority of good people of all faiths have always known, that God suffers with us, but that suffering is not the final word. In commenting on this, Barbara Brown Taylor, who was a Methodist preacher and minister who left the church because they wouldn't ordain gays and because the church was just so out of step with the realities we are called to care for, and now teaches at seminary. She says, it is not that popular an idea among Christians that God suffers. We prefer a God who prevents suffering. Only that is not the God that we've got. What the cross teaches us is that God's power is not the power to force human choices and end human pain. It is instead the power to pick up the shattered pieces and make something holy out of them. And not from a distance, right up close where the mess and the pain is. That's what this table and this simple meal proclaims. That's what the Passover meal that Jesus and his Jewish brothers and sisters and that the Jews still eat today proclaims. That we don't have a God who can force people to make the right decisions. We don't have a God who can avoid good people being slaves, which is where Passover and the Seder meal starts. And the Christian story that begins with a good man being killed on a cross, that's where Christianity starts. There's no religion or philosophy, whether the power of attraction or prosperity gospel, there's no guru, no prayer, no church, no nothing that can save us from pain. And if somebody's peddling and letting you think there's a better way, you believe this, you do this, you'll be exempt, it's a lie. It's a great big lie. Our very existence as humans begins with childbirth. And I hear from my wife it's painful, often life-threatening. And think of the trauma it is for the child. I mean, floating around in our mother's womb, everything provided for, don't have to get up and go to work, right? Got this nice drum beat of music happening. Apparently we flip around sometimes. I mean, holy mackerel. And then all of a sudden, we feel this pressure, this pain. We come out into noise, out of our whole environment, cold. Oh, it was a death, wasn't it? It was a death. We came into new life. And life and love are worth the struggle and the pain. And as real as the pain is, the amazing miracle of life and love are worth it. We see so clearly throughout history and the details of our lives that there is a God that we are part of. We're made in God's image, male and female, God and goddess, a grace and a goodness that is the very part of existence. A God who has the power to pick up the shattered pieces and make something holy, and W-H-O-L-L-Y, to make us whole. Wholly the best we've been created to be, our best, kind, respectful, and fair selves. And Passover points that out, that despite the pain, the Jewish people did get free from slavery. Our ancestors who were serfs got free. Communion points out that despite Jesus' death on the cross, his practice of inclusion, his message of a coming world where fairness would be international law has not been stopped and in fact multiplied and spread because of his death. You can't compress and stop love and life. The anointing of Jesus, of slaves, of you and I. We share in this Christ energy, this Christ love, and it cannot be stopped by violence and death. It only grows. God never lets a crisis go to waste. Not your crisis and not mine. Always at work. In the midst of crisis, we're unable to see the possibilities. Even on a good day, none of us has the foggiest notion of how creation will overcome the problems we've created and are creating that are so huge and threatening. We can feel powerless and small. But our faith and the story of our ancestors calls us to realize we're part of the divine. I mean, if you're on a world-winning team, there's nobody on that team that feels small. Not even the kid that's currying the water out to the players. You're on the winning team. Easter says we're on the winning team. Says this world and creation is on the winning team. We're not just shareholders in the business of creation. It's the family business. It's the family business. We sit at table with Jesus. He's not just our example, not just our God. He's our friend. Jesus says to his disciples before he dies, I'm not calling you disciples anymore. You're my friends. We're friends. It's all family. We're all there for one another. That's how God's there for us. We sit at table with God and God is with us. That's the great truth Jesus revealed. His name is Emmanuel, God with us and us with God. We're all family with creation. Harming one harms the other. Killing creation will kill us. Life and love are one. We're not better than others. We're not better than the rest of creation, and we're not less than either. We're part of the team. Jesus was always inviting people to be aware of their divine dignity. That's what drove the leaders crazy. He gave everyone their divine dignity, calling people to take their place as friends with God, children of God, partners in the divine family business of being our best selves, standing up for those who are treated badly and unfairly, even though we mess up at times. And I love the Bible stories because they show us mess it up. And where would we be in our faith if it wasn't based on stories where people mess up? Because we mess up. I do anyway. Some of you wouldn't mess up as much as me, but I know how to mess up. When the disciples, they gave up. They figured it was all for naught. They thought they were going to change the world, but as I said, the world changed them. And they were, in this story, they go back to fishing. And they didn't believe this calling anymore. They couldn't put this calling of some new kingdom, where it's going to be based on kindness, respect, and fairness, where every tribe and religion and gender and sexual orientation, race, religion, and money, that we can all kind of respect one another and care for one another. No. We got to go back to something that's real. We're going back to fishing. And Peter, wow, he gave up his self-respect. He gave up believing that Jesus changing his name from Simon to Peter meant anything. Peter had said, hey, you're not just Simon, you're Peter. You're a rock, buddy. And Peter had thought, hey, man, I'm the rock. And he says, I'll never betray you, Jesus. And then he does 3 times and runs away. I mean, how does Peter live with that? His focus is on the fishing. And they weren't catching any fish either. But God's not finished with them or us. The stranger, someone who's easily ignored or someone who can be perceived as a threat, the stranger shows up, in the Easter stories. It's the stranger, which is really funny that we made Easter about Jesus' body rising from the dead because, even if he was the worst for wear, you'd know it was Jesus, right? It's a stranger. I don't know who this guy is. But this guy shows up, the anointed one, anointed with divine creativity, healing, caring, forgiveness, all the tools those disciples needed, all the tools we need, all the tools we have. And he gets their attention with what sounds like a newfie joke to me, right? They fish all night, and they don't catch any fish. Hey, boys, how you doing? Oh, it's bad fishing tonight. Didn't catch nothing. Well, you know what? Why don't you just put your nets on the other side of the boat? Oh, never thought of that. Put the nets on the other side of the boat. Oh, my goodness gracious sakes alive, they're full of fish. Who'd have thunk it? Like there's some other side of the boat in the water, right? But the stranger gets their attention. And, these miracle stories, there's some people still trying to make sense out of them. And, if you believe the miracle stories, literally fine, but they're not going to do you any good because none of these miracle stories happen in our day. The miracle stories are great attention getters that have a special point to make, like in movies and good stories today. The Jews are among the best storytellers in the world. That's why they built Hollywood. They can tell a story. And one of the things you got to do when you're telling the story is get the kids' attention. And also do it in a symbolic way that unearths some meaning of what the story is about. And so as they start to listen to the strangers, some good things are happening, and they come in, and he feeds them breakfast. It'd be nice to have a communion meal where we get some juice and fish, for those of us who like fish. And in his kindness, they discover, wow, okay, it's still happening. Jesus may be gone, but the Christ is here. The Christ is with us. As they connect with one another, they realize God is with them, and they experience Jesus again around that fire. They begin to lose their anger, their fear. They begin to imagine again what God might be able to do in them. They begin to believe in a deeper, more mature, experienced way that God can take something and make something holy out of the tatters of life. That God can make something holy, really fulfilling and special out of the tatters of their community, out of them and out of us. And Peter's so broken, Jesus has to give him special attention and says to him 3 times, reminiscent of Peter betraying Jesus 3 times, Peter, I need you, buddy. will you feed my sheep? And he says, oh, yes, I love you. And he's thinking, oh, my goodness, really? Is this for real? And he says, yes. He said, come on, feed my sheep. And do you love me? And Peter says, oh, yes, I do, but he's never going to believe me, right? You can just imagine what's going through his head. And the third time, Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, yes, I do. And Jesus said, will you feed my sheep? And he says, yes, I'll get back in the game. I'll get back in the game. I got it now. The suffering didn't end it. The pain didn't bring it to an end. This is just a beginning for me, and a new beginning for our world. This table we gather food from today, which extends to the chairs of all of you at home. Get a glass of water, a cup of tea, or something. This table belongs to the stranger on the beach, our world, our lives, who comes to reassure us and challenge us to see the beauty and the grace and the goodness of life, your life and mine. This table is evidence of a movement for love and justice that cannot be stopped. This table and its simple meal invites us as friends and family and partners in the divine mystery. Oh, if we could get a new self-image, realizing whose we are, then we'll finally know who we are. It names us as anointed ones, as the resurrected body of Jesus today, able to do with God and one another what God does, making something important and beautiful and life-giving and loving out of the tatters of our experiences. Beauty instead of ashes. This table invites us to claim our dignity as the people of God, to keep focusing every day on the magic, the power, the universal cosmic power of kindness. Every day in every way, to continue to build a community here where people are valued just because they're people. And yeah, we worry about our community and our givings, but friends, let's not invest in the worry. For whatever time we have, let's enjoy and appreciate each other. Let's make this the community in this whole part of the city where somebody can come and know, no matter what they think or believe or anything, that if they are kind, that they are everything God needs them to be, and we respect them as such. That brings the miracles. This table and worship experience enables us to feel something of that special, holy part of us that we cannot see in ourselves, but that God sees, because God put it in us. Thanks be to God.